esophagus. The esophagus. Now, what is esophagus in anatomy? Per the structure here, as you can see, this is the esophageal tube or the esophagus. Now, when you say esophagus, as you can see, it says straight, collapsible tube. Esophagus is a straight, collapsible tube that extends from the pharynx, or it extends from the throat. Then it moves down through the thoracic cavity, then to the diaphragm, then later it will join the stomach. So it moves down, it starts from the throat or the pharynx, through the thoracic cavity, through the diaphragm, then it joins the what? The stomach. Now again, we know that it is a long or it is a straight tube. So it measures about 25 centimeters long. And it lies anterior to the vertebra. Again, posteriorly, at the back of the esophagus, you can find your trachea. So posteriorly is to the trachea. That is within the mediastinum of the thoracic cavity. Again, the esophagus is lined with mucous membrane. And the function of the mucous membrane is to produce mucus that lubricates the lining, or it aids in the passage of food into the stomach. That is that. For the mucous lining the esophagus. Now, as you can see, at the junction of the esophagus and the stomach, there is a thickened ring of circular muscle fibers. Look at the junction where the esophagus meets the stomach. It's called the junction, and it is made up of a thickened ring of circular muscle fibers, which is known as lower esophageal sphincter. Another name for lower esophageal sphincter is cardiac sphincter. And as you all know, it is a sphincter. And the function of the sphincter is the sphincter constricts, and the constriction prevents regurgitation, or it prevents shine that is already in the stomach from going back into the esophagus. So whenever food enters from the esophagus into the stomach, the sphincter closes, and the closure is to prevent the already entered food into the stomach from coming back or from regurgitating back into the esophagus. At the same time, the reason why the sphincter also opens is to allow the food to enter into the stomach. That is all about esophagus. Now, let's go down to the structure below the stomach. Now, what is the shape of the stomach? The shape. Now, the stomach is a muscular J-shaped organ. It's a muscular J-shaped organ. Or some who says it is a pouch-like organ, or it is an enlarged segment of the digestive tract. And as you all know, the stomach lies below the diaphragm, and where it is located is left upper quadrant of the abdomen. Again, the stomach can be found at the umbilicus or at the epigastric region of the abdomen. Now, look at the length of the stomach. What do you think will be the length of the stomach? The length of the stomach, some books are saying that the length is between 15 to 25 centimeters. But the diameter and the volume of the stomach depends on the presence of food in it. So for the length, we have it. but the diameter and the volume depends on the amount of food that is present in the stomach. Now let's look at the anatomical relations of the stomach. Now anteriorly, the stomach is to the left lobe of the liver. Anteriorly, it is to the left lobe of the liver. What about posterior? The posterior aspect of the stomach is to the spleen, is to the pancreas, and is to the vertebral column. Now, superiorly, the stomach is to the liver and the diaphragm. Then, inferiorly, is to the transverse colon and the small intestines. So we are going to take the macroscopic landmark of the stomach and discuss them one by one. Now we are going to describe the stomach macroscopically. And macroscopically, the stomach is made up of 4 regions, namely the cardiac region, the fundus, the body, and the pyloric region. It's made up of the cardiac region, the fundus, the body, and the pyloric region. Now, let's take the cardiac region. Now, when you say the cardiac region, by the name cardiac, the cardiac means the heart. So the cardiac region is the portion of the stomach that is closer to the heart. And it is the relatively small area that receives food from the esophagus. That is all about the cardiac region. Now let's take the fundus. Now as you see the fundus is the dome-shaped portion. It's like Perez dome. It's a dome-shaped portion, and aside being dome, it is the most superior portion of the stomach. But remember that the fundus can expand above the level of the cardiac region. And the function of the fundus is to store food temporarily before the food can be given to the body of the stomach for the churning action to occur. So whenever you swallow food, the cardiac region receives it, then temporarily it is stored in the fundus so that later it will be given to the body for necessary action. Now let's take the pyloric region. The pyloric region. Now for the pyloric region, as you can see, it is the narrow funnel terminal portion. It is narrow. The region is narrow. It's like a funnel, and it's at the terminal portion of the stomach. So it is the narrow terminal portion of the stomach that is located near the junction with the what? Duodenum. Now, the last part of the stomach is the body. Now, if you look at the body, this is the body. And the body is made up of greater curvature and lesser curvature. Now, we all know that the body forms the largest portion of the stomach. Why? Why? Because the body tends to right. As it tends to right, it forms greater curvature at the lips. It has turned to right like this, and it is forming greater curvature at my lips. Then it turns to left, it forms lesser curvature at my what? Right. So that is something small about the body. But in sum, the body is the portion of the stomach that is located between the cardiac region and the pyloric region. But remember, inside the cardiac region, there is cardiac sphincter. And we know the cardiac sphincter to be the thickened ring of circular muscle fibers that constricts to prevent food from regurgitating into the esophagus. The same thing applies to the pyloric region that is also made up of pyloric sphincter. And the pyloric sphincter is also made up of thickened ring of circular muscle fibers that constricts to prevent bolus or chine that has entered into the duodenum from regurgitating back into the stomach. So these are the 4 main areas of the stomach. Any question? Now let's look at the microscopic structure of the stomach. Microscopically, the stomach is made up of muscular layer. The stomach is made up of mucosa and submucosa. The stomach is made up of epithelial cells. The stomach is made up of deep gastric pits. Now let's take them anatomically and describe them. Now what are those muscular layers of the stomach? The muscular layers of the stomach are made up of, or are into 3 kinds. Namely, the outer longitudinal muscle layer, the middle circular layer, and the inner oblique layer. This is the outer longitudinal, the middle circular, then the inner oblique layer. So the muscular layer, they are made up of 3 layers. And remember that these 3 muscular layers, they produce churning action. They produce churning action in the stomach whenever they contract. When you say churning action, it's the process of the muscular layers of the stomach mixing food with gastric secretion. That is one aspect. Remember that the stomach too is also made up of mucosa and submucosa. So the submucosa and the mucosa of the stomach is also thrown into numerous folds, and the name of the fold is called rugae. The mucosa and the submucosa of the stomach is thrown into numerous folds, and the name of the fold is called what? Rugae. Now, this is what the rugae does. The rugae, or the folds, it allows the mucosa to stretch as the stomach is being filled with food. Gradually, as you are eating, the rugae will be stretching gradually. And as it stretches, it will be filled with what? Food. Again, the mucosa is also dotted with numerous pores. These are the pores that are dotted on the mucosa, or holes, or opening. So the mucosa is dotted with numerous pores. And the name of the pores is called deep gastric pits. And as you all know, the deep gastric pits, they are the openings of the deep gastric gland. Within the stomach, or inside the stomach, there are glands that pause their secretion to come out through the deep gastric pits. So we are done with the other aspects. Now let's take the epithelial cells of the stomach. There are 5 epithelial cells of the stomach. Now, they are the mucous or the surface mucous cells. And the surface mucous cells, they are located on the inner surface of the stomach. At the same time, they line the deep gastric pits. So these are the areas where the surface mucous cells are located, lining the deep gastric pits, at the same time in the inner surface of the stomach. Now, secondly, The second epithelial cells is the surface mucous cells. Another name for the surface mucous cell is called agentaphin cells. Now, what do they do? What is the function of the agentaphin cells? The name surface mucous cell or agentaphin cells, and their function is to secrete serotonin and histamine. And both serotonin and histamine, they are both autocrine regulators. So they secrete these autocrine regulators. That is one function of the agentaphin cells. Another function of these agentaphin cells is that they also produce mucus. And the mucus coats and protects the stomach lining from acid damage. Now, the third epithelial cells is the mucous neck cells or goblet cells. Now, these mucous neck cells or the goblet cells, they produce mucus, and the mucus protects the stomach wall from auto-digestion. At a point in time, the stomach lining can be auto-digested by the hydrochloric acid. So the function of the goblet cells is to secrete the mucus that will protect the stomach lining from auto-digestion. Now, the next epithelial cell is the parietal cell or oxyntic cell. Now, the oxyntic cell and the parietal cell, what they do is they produce hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. Now, the intrinsic factor that is produced by the parietal cells is needed for the absorption of vitamin B12. So whenever this intrinsic factor is lacking in somebody, the person will end up having pernicious anemia. Then the last but one epithelial cells is the endocrine cells or the gene cells. Now, when we were discussing previously, we said that the endocrine cells, they produce regulatory hormone called gastrin. And the gastrin is produced into the what? Blood. Now, the last epithelial cell is the chief cell or the zymogenic cell. And the zymogenic cell, as you all know, it produces pepsinogen. And pepsinogen is a precursor of protein digesting enzyme pepsin. So pepsinogen is inactive protein digestive enzyme. So whenever gastric juice in the stomach mixes with food and converts it into semi-solid food, it is no more pure food, but rather it is called slime. Any question? Now, how does the gastric secretion in the stomach controlled? So our next topic is control of gastric secretion. And control of gastric secretion is phased into two phases. We have the neural control and hormonal control. Now, how does the hormonal control or how does the neural control occur? Now, the neural control, as we all know, is about gastric juice secretion. The neural control will lead to gastric secretion. The hormonal control will also lead to gastric juice what? Secretion. But remember, daily and everyday gastric juice are produced continuously. But the secretion will be increased whenever food is on the way to your stomach or whenever food is already in the stomach. Secondly, whenever there is a sight, whenever there is a smell, or whenever there is thought of appetizing food, gastric juice secretion will be increased. Now, whenever food is in your mouth, or whenever food is in the stomach, the cells of the stomach will be stimulated by the parasympathetic impulses. So there will be transmission of parasympathetic impulses, and the parasympathetic impulses will cause increase in the secretion of gastric juice. That is neural control. Now for the hormonal control, the same increase in the impulse transmission, or the same increase in the parasympathetic impulse stimulation, will cause the stomach cells, specifically the endocrine cells or the gene cells, to secrete a hormone called gastrin. Now the gastrin will be carried by the blood to the bloodstream. Then the same blood will carry the gastrin back to the stomach cells. As the gastrin reaches the stomach cells, it will trigger the cells of the stomach to secrete more of the gastric juice. That is why I said that the neural control and the hormonal control, both of them will lead to increase in gastric secretion. So at the end of the day, as the gastrin has been released, then it has been sent by the blood. Then the blood has brought it back to the stomach cells for gastric juice secretion to be increased. The duodenum will open. The moment the duodenum opens, the chyme in the stomach will begin to be emptied into the duodenum. So the gradual emptying of the chyme from the stomach into the duodenum will cause decrease in the gastric secretion in the stomach. Thereby, the presence of the chyme from the stomach into the duodenum will cause the secretion of duodenal hormones called cholecystokinin or CCK and secreted to be released into the duodenum. And by doing so, the sympathetic impulses in the stomach will decrease, and later it will stop. Any question? Now, what are some of the functions of the stomach? One of the functions of the stomach is storage of food. When you eat, the food goes and... Now, I told you that whenever you eat, you have heard of ruminants before. Now, there's a saying that those goats, they hide food in their jaws. Now, human beings are like goats. Whenever you eat, food is temporarily stored here before it will be given to the body for the churning action to begin. So the stomach serves as a storage facility for food. Another function is that it churns food into chyme. I said whenever food lands in the stomach, the outer longitudinal layer, the middle circular layer, the inner oblique layer, they are thrown into action. And the action will help them to mix the food with gastric secretion to form the chyme. So it churns food into chyme. Then the third function is stomach secretes hormones. What are those hormones? Gastrin, histamine, serotonin. Another function of the stomach is it secretes digestive enzymes. And what are those enzymes? Pepsinogen, which is later activated into what? Pepsin. Then the last function of the stomach is some amount of absorption takes place in the stomach. And what are those substances? Ions, water, and alcohol absorption takes place in the stomach. Any question? Now you can ask question. Any question? So if there are no questions, if there are no addition, subtraction, multiplication, or anything, then we can call it a day. We'll meet next time to proceed from smaller intestine. Thank you.